The aluminum locker door slammed shut with a hollow finality that echoed through the empty ready room. Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Knight stood motionless, her fingertips still pressed against the cool metal surface. After 15 years of service, thousands of flight hours and 89 combat missions, her career in the United States Air Force had come down to this unremarkable moment. A locker cleared out, a chapter closed. The ready room at Miramar Air Station in San Diego had emptied hours ago. Her fellow pilots had offered brief handshakes, awkward hugs, and promises to keep in touch that both parties knew would fade like contrails in the afternoon sky. Alex preferred it this way. No grand ceremony, no emotional speeches. Just silence and the chance to say goodbye to the life she had built on her own terms. Her hand drifted to the small scar at her left temple, a souvenir from the mission that had changed everything. September 15th, 2019. Helmand Province. The memory surged unbidden, carrying with it the soundtrack of that night, the frantic radio chatter, the dull thump of anti-aircraft fire, the shriek of missile lock warnings, and her own measured breathing as she had pushed her F-16 beyond its operational limits. "Still hurts sometimes," a voice asked from the doorway. Alex turned to find her younger brother Derek leaning against the frame, still in his Navy workout clothes. At 32, 4 years her junior, Derek Knight had the lean, coiled physique of the elite warrior he was. A lieutenant with SEAL Team 5, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen the worst humanity could offer and survived to tell about it. "Only when it rains," Alex replied, forcing a smile. "Or when I remember." Derek crossed the room, his footfalls nearly silent despite his size, a habit born from years of training to move without being detected. He stopped at the small table where Alex had placed the shadow box containing her distinguished flying cross. "They should have given you the Silver Star," he said, his voice carrying an edge of barely contained anger. "What you did that night saved 8 men. Alex shrugged. "The mission was classified. The medal is enough." "Is it?" Derek challenged, turning to face her. His eyes, the same sharp gray as hers, searched her face. "You're leaving because of it, aren't you? Because they never acknowledged what really happened." The accusation hung in the air between them. Alex moved to the window, looking out across the tarmac where F-35s gleamed in the California sunshine. The next generation of fighters. The future she would no longer be part of. "I'm leaving because 15 years is enough," she said finally. "Time for something new." Derek didn't press, but his expression made clear he wasn't convinced. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded invitation card. "That's actually why I came by. There's a special operations symposium next week here in San Diego. I was hoping you might come." Alex took the card, glancing at the embossed lettering. "A room full of testosterone and war stories." "Not exactly my idea of fun, Derek." "Captain Jack Sullivan is the keynote speaker," Derek continued, ignoring her objection. His voice took on a tone of genuine admiration that Alex rarely heard from her normally stoic brother. 3 bronze stars, 2 silver stars. The guy's a legend in the SEAL community." Something in Derek's enthusiasm caught Alex's attention. She studied her brother's face, noting the unusual animation in his features. "This means a lot to you," she observed. "Not a question." Derek nodded. "Sullivan was my first team leader, taught me everything I know about staying alive in bad situations." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "He's also the one who sent me the message about Dad." Alex felt her chest tighten. Their father, Colonel William Knight, had been reported killed in a training accident in '91, shortly after the First Gulf War. The official story had always seemed incomplete, with details that never quite aligned. It had been the driving force behind both siblings joining the military, each in their own way, seeking answers to questions that remained unasked. "What message?" Alex asked, her voice suddenly dry. "Not over the phone," Derek said, glancing around despite the empty room. "But Sullivan knows things, Lex. About Dad, about the mission where he died. Come to the symposium. I'll introduce you." Alex looked down at the invitation again, torn between her instinct to retreat into civilian life and the pull of a 30-year-old mystery. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Derek accepted it with a nod, knowing his sister well enough to recognize it as progress. "Just text me if you decide to come. I'll save you a seat." After Derek left, Alex sat alone in the ready room, the invitation heavy in her hand. Her thoughts drifted to the photo in her emptied locker, now carefully wrapped in her duffel bag. A young William Knight standing proudly beside his F-4 Phantom, call sign Ghost, emblazoned beneath the cockpit. His legacy had shaped her entire life, driving her to become one of the first female fighter pilots to fly repeated combat missions. And now the possibility that she might finally learn the truth about his death both attracted and terrified her. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a number she didn't recognize. The answers you seek are at the symposium. Your father would be proud of who you've become. Meet me tomorrow, 800 Torrey Pines firing range. McAllister. Alex stared at the message, pulse quickening. James Eagle McAllister, her father's wingman during the Gulf War. A man she had met only once at her father's funeral, where he had pressed her small shoulder with a weathered hand and promised, "Someday when you're ready, we'll talk about your dad." It seemed that someday had finally arrived. The next morning dawned clear and crisp as Alex pulled her Jeep into the parking lot of the Torrey Pines shooting range. The facility was quiet with only a handful of cars parked in the gravel lot. Alex checked her watch, 0755. She was early as usual, a habit ingrained through years of military discipline. She spotted him immediately. Thew Tung James McAllister stood alone at the far end of the outdoor range, his tall frame still ramrod straight despite his 68 years. Age had silvered his hair and deepened the lines around his eyes, but it had done nothing to diminish his commanding presence. Even in civilian clothes, a simple khaki shirt and tactical pants, he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of a senior officer. As Alex approached, McAllister turned, revealing a weathered face that had seen too much sun and too many battles. His eyes, sharp and assessing, softened slightly as he recognized her. "Lieutenant Colonel Knight," he said, his voice a graveled rumble. "You look just like your mother." He extended a hand that was calloused and strong. "General McAllister," Alex replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Retired," he corrected. "It's just Jim now." He gestured to the shooting lane where 2 Beretta M9s had been laid out, along with hearing protection and several boxes of ammunition. "Thought we might do some shooting while we talk. Your father always said range time cleared his head." Alex nodded, slipping on the ear protection and picking up one of the pistols. It felt familiar in her hand, its weight and balance an extension of her arm. She checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, loaded a magazine, and took a stance. 6 shots later, the silhouette target showed a tight grouping in the center mass. McAllister raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Not bad for a Zoomy." Alex allowed herself a small smile at the old Air Force nickname. "Dad made sure Derek and I could handle ourselves with more than just aircraft. Said a knight should be prepared for anything." "Sounds like Bill," McAllister nodded, picking up the second pistol. His shots were equally precise, the decades having done little to erode his marksmanship. After emptying his magazine, he set the weapon down and turned to face Alex fully. "You want to know about your father's last mission?" he said without preamble. It wasn't a question, but Alex answered anyway. "Yes, sir." McAllister's gaze drifted past her, focusing on something only he could see. "The official report says training accident over the Nevada desert. Engine failure, no ejection attempt." His jaw tightened. It was a lie, Alex, every word of it. Alex had suspected as much for years, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through her, despite the warm morning sun. "What really happened?" she asked, her voice steady. McAllister reloaded his weapon methodically, each movement precise and measured. "Iraq, 1991. After Desert Storm officially ended. Your father volunteered for a classified mission deep in Iraqi territory. Something the brass wanted kept off the books." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. He was providing close air support for a SEAL team extracting a high-value intelligence asset. "SEALs," Alex echoed, thinking of her brother. "Was Sullivan involved?" "Not Jack," McAllister said. "His father, Commander William Sullivan. Jack was just a kid then." Alex struggled to process this new information. "What went wrong?" McAllister fired another 6 shots before answering. "Everything. Bad intel, enemy reinforcements. The extraction point was compromised." His voice tightened. "The SEAL team was pinned down, taking heavy fire. Your father made a decision." Alex could see where this was heading. "He went in too low." McAllister nodded. "Bill knew the risks. Flew repeated danger close gun runs to keep the enemy's heads down until the SEALs could reach the secondary extraction point. On his final pass, he took a direct hit from a shoulder-fired missile." His voice grew quiet. He could have ejected earlier, but he stayed with the aircraft long enough to complete one final strafing run. That decision saved the entire SEAL team. Saved Sullivan. Why cover it up? Alex asked, anger seeping into her voice. Why not acknowledge what he did? Politics. McAllister spat the word like something distasteful. The mission wasn't sanctioned. We weren't supposed to have boots on the ground in that region after the ceasefire. Admitting what happened would have created an international incident. He shook his head. So they buried the truth along with your father, gave him a closed casket in a convenient story. Alex felt a familiar burning behind her eyes but refused to give in to it. Instead, she raised her pistol and emptied the magazine, each shot a punctuation mark for her controlled fury. When she finished, the target showed a ragged hole where the heart would be. That symposium next week, McAllister said as the echo of gunfire faded. Sullivan's son will be speaking. Jack knows the truth about your father. His dad told him everything before he passed. And you think he'll talk to me about it? Alex asked. McAllister's weathered face creased into a sad smile. I think there are stories that need to be told, Alex. Truths that need to come to light. He ejected the spent magazine from his pistol. It's been 30 years. Maybe it's time to break the silence. They finished their ranging session in contemplative quiet, the rhythmic report of their firearms providing a meditation of sorts. As they packed up, McAllister placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, the gesture reminiscent of that long-ago funeral. Your father would be proud of you, Alex. Not just for following in his footsteps, but for surpassing them. 89 combat missions. That's a legacy few can claim. Alex felt the weight of those missions in her bones, in the scar at her temple, in the memories that sometimes jolted her awake at night. Will you come to the symposium? McAllister asked. Alex thought of her brother's invitation, of Sullivan's potential knowledge about her father, of the classified mission in Helmand Province that had ended her own career. Yes, she said simply, I'll be there. As she drove away from the range, the California coastline glittering in the distance, Alex felt something shift inside her. For 15 years, she had chased her father's ghost, trying to live up to a legacy she never fully understood. Now perhaps she would finally learn the truth about the man whose absence had shaped her life, and in doing so, make peace with her own story. The United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs stood as a monument to American air power, its distinctive chapel spires reaching toward the sky like the aircraft the institution had been built to master. For Cadet Alexis Knight in 2005, it represented both opportunity and obstacle, a place where she could honor her father's memory while forging her own path. The memory was vivid as Alex drove through San Diego traffic. She could still feel the thin mountain air burning in her lungs as she completed her morning run, still taste the mixture of exhilaration and fear as she stood with 5 other female cadets among the hundreds vying for the coveted fighter pilot slots. What are you thinking, Knight, that your daddy's name is going to get you into the cockpit? The voice belonged to Colonel Richard Harrison, callsign Thunderbolt, the Academy's most notorious instructor and a decorated F-15 pilot with 3 confirmed kills from Desert Storm. His face loomed in her memory, perpetually sunburned, and disapproving eyes hidden behind mirrored aviator sunglasses that reflected her own determined expression back at her. No, sir, 22-year-old Alex had responded, standing at rigid attention. I'm thinking my scores will do that. Harrison had circled her like a shark, the other cadets watching in tense silence. You know what the battlefield cares about, cadet, not your test scores, not your gender, not your equality. It only cares if you can kill the enemy before they kill you and your teammates. Yes, sir. The day they let women fly combat missions was the beginning of the end for American air superiority. Harrison had continued loud enough for everyone to hear. You want to prove me wrong, Knight? You'll have to work twice as hard as every man here. And she had, through the grueling physical training that pushed her body to its limits, through the simulator hours where a single mistake meant failure, through the underwater evacuation drills where panic lurked at the edges of every breath. The memory of those drills surfaced with particular clarity. The simulator cockpit plunging into the pool, filling rapidly with water as she fought to remember the evacuation sequence. The disorientation as the module rotated, her sense of up and down vanishing in the churning water. And then the unexpected. Cadet Michael Reynolds, who had boasted he would be the top of their class trapped in his harness movements, becoming frantic as precious seconds ticked by. Without hesitation, Alex had freed herself first, then swum to him, her lungs burning as she helped release his jammed harness and pulled him to the surface. Later, dripping wet on the pool deck, Reynolds had looked at her with new eyes. "You saved my ass back there, Knight." "Just following protocol," she had replied, but they both knew it was more than that. It was the moment she had begun to earn respect, not for her name or her gender, but for her actions under pressure. Harrison had watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable behind those mirrored glasses. Adequate performance, Knight, was all he said, but it was the first time he had acknowledged her with anything other than derision. The memory faded as Alex navigated through an intersection replaced by images from Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, where her journey to become an F-16 pilot had begun in earnest. The blistering desert heat radiating from the tarmac. The impressive silhouette of the Fighting Falcon against the blue sky. The weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders with each training mission. She remembered her first solo flight in the F-16, the exhilarating freedom as the aircraft responded to her touch, the power of the Pratt & Whitney F-100 PW229 engine, pushing her back into her seat as she climbed into the clear desert sky. In those moments, she had felt closest to her father, as though she could almost hear his voice guiding her through the maneuvers. Her instructor at Luke had been different from Harrison. Colonel Catherine Valkyrie Williams had been among the first female pilots to fly combat missions during Desert Storm. She had taken Alex under her wing, recognizing in the younger woman the same determination she had once needed to navigate the male-dominated world of fighter aviation. "Listen to me, Knight," Valkyrie had told her after a particularly difficult training mission. "In this aircraft, it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. All that matters is if you can fly and fight. The enemy missiles don't care about your gender, and neither should you." It was a lesson Alex carried with her to Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan in 2018, where she faced her first real combat deployment. The harsh landscape of Afghanistan had been unlike anything she had experienced, the snow-capped Hindu Kush Mountains giving way to dusty valleys where centuries of conflict had scarred the earth. Her squadron commander had assembled the pilots for the mission, briefing, his expression grave as he outlined the parameters for a close air support mission for special forces operating in contested territory. "This one's hot people," he had warned. "Intelligence reports heavy Taliban presence in the area. Our boys on the ground are counting on us to be their eyes in the sky and their hammers if things go south." Alex had felt the weight of the other pilot's stares as the commander assigned her to the mission. Captain Michael Stryker Reynolds, her former classmate from the academy, who had risen through the ranks alongside her, had been particularly vocal. "With respect, sir, is Knight ready for this?" "It's not exactly a milk run." The commander had fixed Reynolds with a steady gaze. "Lieutenant Colonel Knight has the highest simulator scores in the squadron and more training hours than anyone here except me. She's ready." Later, as they walked to their aircraft, Reynolds had fallen in step beside her. "No hard feelings, Knight. Just looking out for the team." "I appreciate the concern," Alex had replied coolly, "but save it for the Taliban." The mission itself remained etched in her memory with crystalline clarity. The weight of her flight gear, the pre-flight checks, the surge of adrenaline as her F-16 roared down the runway and lifted into the Afghan sky, the tactical radio chatter as they established their patrol pattern high above the mountainous terrain. Everything had proceeded according to plan until a desperate call had crackled over the radio. "Any air assets in the vicinity of grid coordinates, Echo Charlie 457890. This is Badger Team. We are taking heavy fire request, immediate air support." The voice had been tight with strain, the sound of gunfire audible in the background. Alex had checked her map display. Badger Team was outside their assigned operational area, but close enough that she could respond faster than any other aircraft. "Stryker, this is Viper," she had called to her wingman. "I'm breaking formation to respond to that distress call." "Negative, Viper," Reynolds had replied. "We don't have clearance for that sector. Follow mission parameters." Alex had hesitated for only a moment before making her decision. "Badger Team, this is Viper 99. I copy your request and am inbound. Hold tight." Banking her aircraft sharply, she had descended toward the coordinates, her targeting systems scanning the rugged terrain below. The tactical display had revealed the dire situation: a small team of Special Forces operators pinned down in a narrow valley, surrounded by a much larger enemy force. Viper 9, this is Badger Lead. The ground controller had responded to relief evident in his voice. We have approximately 30-plus hostiles converging on our position from the north and east ridge lines. We need danger close fire support immediately. Danger close meant the friendly forces were within 600 meters of the target, a razor-thin margin of error that left no room for mistakes. One miscalculation, one slight deviation, and she could hit the very men she was trying to save. Copy that, Badger Lead, Alex had responded, her voice calm despite the pressure. I need you to mark your position. A smoke grenade had blossomed on the valley floor, its purple plume visible against the brown landscape. Positive ID on your smoke, Alex had confirmed, making my first run from the northeast. Keep your heads down. She had pushed the F-16 into a steep dive, the targeting reticle in her heads-up display fixed on the ridgeline where muzzle flashes indicated enemy positions. The aircraft's 20mm M61A1 Vulcan cannon had roared to life, sending a stream of high-explosive rounds into the hillside. Rock and dust erupted as the rounds impacted, silencing several of the enemy firing positions. Good effect on target, Badger Lead had called out. They're pulling back, but we've got another group moving in from the west. For the next 20 minutes, Alex had executed a series of precise attack runs using both cannon fire and 500-pound guided bombs to keep the Taliban fighters at bay, while the Special Forces team repositioned to a more defensible location. Each pass had brought her aircraft dangerously close to the ground, exposing her to small arms fire from below. Viper 99, you're taking fire, Badger Lead had warned as tracer rounds streaked past her canopy. I see it, Alex had responded, executing a tight banking maneuver that strained against the physical limits of both aircraft and pilot. The F-16 had responded perfectly, pulling out of the danger zone before rolling back for another attack run. By the time a rescue helicopter arrived to extract the Special Forces team, Alex had expended nearly all her ammunition and was running low on fuel. As she pulled up from her final pass, the team leader's voice had come over the radio. Viper 99, this is Badger Lead. I don't know who you are, but you saved our asses today. We owe you a case of beer when we all get back to base. Alex had allowed herself a small smile as she climbed back to altitude. Just doing my job, Badger. Get home safe. Upon returning to base, she had expected a reprimand for deviating from the mission parameters. Instead, her commander had simply studied the gun camera footage in silence before looking up at her with newfound respect. You made the right call, Knight, he had said finally. Not many pilots could have pulled off those danger-close runs with that level of precision. From that day forward, her call sign Viper had taken on new meaning within the squadron. It was no longer just her designated radio identifier, but a mark of respect. Even Reynolds had begrudgingly acknowledged her skill. Not bad flying today, Knight, he had admitted in the mess hall that evening. Guess your old man would be proud. Alex had simply nodded, knowing that somewhere, somehow, her father was indeed watching. And perhaps for the first time since his death, she had done something truly worthy of the Knight name. As the California sun began to set, casting long shadows across her apartment, Alex found herself standing before the closet, where her dress uniform hung still immaculate, despite her recent separation from service. Her hand reached out, fingers tracing the wings on her chest, the ribbons that told the story of her career. Tomorrow was the symposium. Tomorrow she might finally learn the truth about her father's death, and perhaps find some closure for her own truncated career. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Both Knight's father and daughter performing classified missions to save embattled SEAL teams, both paying prices that remained hidden from public view. Alex closed the closet door and moved to the window, looking out over San Diego as lights began to twinkle across the cityscape. Somewhere out there, Jack Sullivan was preparing his speech, unaware that the daughter of the man who had saved his father's life would be in the audience. Tomorrow would bring answers, or perhaps just more questions. Either way, Alex Knight was finally ready to face them. The desert sun beat down on Bagram Air Base with merciless intensity, the temperature already climbing past 90 degrees despite the early hour. Dust devils swirled across the tarmac, dancing between the rows of aircraft that represented America's air power in this remote corner of Afghanistan. For Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Knight, the harsh environment had become a second home during her deployment rotations, the rhythmic thrum of jet engines and the perpetual taste of dust as familiar as the weight of her flight suit. In the 2 years since her first combat mission, Alex had earned a reputation that transcended her gender. To the men and women of the 455th Air Expeditionary Wing, she wasn't the female pilot anymore. She was Phantom, a call sign bestowed upon her after that first harrowing mission to save the Special Forces team. The name carried echoes of her father's legacy, his F-4 Phantom, from another era of American warfare. But Alex had made it her own through skill, courage, and an uncanny ability to appear precisely when and where she was needed most. "Phantom, you got a minute?" Alex looked up from her pre-flight checklist to find Colonel James Harding, the wing commander, standing at the entrance to the hardened aircraft shelter. His weathered face was set in its usual stoic expression, but something in his eyes suggested this wasn't a routine conversation. "Yes, sir," she replied, securing her tablet and stepping away from her F-16. "Walk with me," Harding said, gesturing toward the command center. They moved in silence through the organized chaos of the flight line maintenance crews and support personnel, parting respectfully before the senior officers. The sun glinted off the polished canopies of the fighter aircraft, each one a $30 million testament to American technological supremacy. Inside the relative cool of the command center, Harding led her to a small briefing room and closed the door behind them. On the table lay a folder marked with red top-secret bands. "I just received this from CENTCOM," Harding began without preamble. "Intelligence has identified a high-value target meeting in Helmand Province tonight. Taliban leadership and possibly al-Qaeda facilitators planning a major offensive against coalition forces." Alex nodded, keeping her expression neutral, despite the surge of adrenaline the words triggered. Helmand was notoriously dangerous, often called the Valley of Death by coalition forces. The Taliban maintained strong control there, despite years of American efforts to pacify the region. "We're sending in a SEAL team to gather intelligence, and if conditions permit, neutralize the leadership element." Harding continued sliding satellite imagery across the table. "Your job is to provide overwatch and close air support if needed." Alex studied the images. The target was a compound nestled against a hillside surrounded by agricultural fields that provided multiple approach routes for ground forces, but also limited cover. "Weather forecast?" she asked, eyes still on the imagery. "Clear skies, three-quarter moon. Good visibility, which works both for and against our boys on the ground." Alex nodded again, understanding the implications. Good visibility meant the SEAL team could navigate more effectively, but it also meant they'd be more exposed to enemy observation. "Rules of engagement." Harding's eyes met hers. "Standard ROE applies, but this is a priority mission, Phantom. If our boys call for help, you give them everything you've got." "Clear, Mom." "Crystal, sir." "Wheels up at 1900. You'll be coordinating with call sign Chaos 6 on the ground." He tapped the folder. "Memorize the details, then return this to me personally." After Harding left, Alex opened the folder and immersed herself in the mission parameters. The intelligence suggested a significant meeting of Taliban commanders, but something about the setup triggered her professional suspicion. The location seemed too exposed, the timing too convenient. But questioning intelligence assessments wasn't her role. Her job was to ensure that if the SEAL team encountered trouble, they had the full weight of American air power at their disposal. As evening approached, Alex prepared herself with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. Each piece of flight gear checked and secured. Each system on her aircraft verified. Each contingency plan reviewed and mentally rehearsed. In the ready room, she found herself assigned to fly with Captain Michael Stryker Reynolds, her former academy classmate, who had evolved from skeptic to reluctant admirer over their shared deployments. "Looks like we're dancing together tonight, Phantom," Reynolds said as he checked his own gear. "Try to keep up, Stryker," she replied with the easy confidence that came from knowing her capabilities. Reynolds grinned. "Always do." "Hey, you heard about the new female pilot in the 421st? Apparently she's been asking about you. Some kind of fan club forming." Alex raised an eyebrow. "Name Chen, Rebecca Chen, call sign Nova. Says she chose fighter track because of you." The information landed with unexpected weight. Alex had never considered herself a trailblazer, had never sought to be a symbol for female aviators. She had simply wanted to fly to serve, to honor her father's memory. The idea that she had become an inspiration to others felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. "I'll talk to her when we get back," Alex said, zipping up her flight suit. "For now, let's focus on keeping those SEALs alive." As twilight settled over Bagram, Alex climbed into the cockpit of her F-16, the familiar confines wrapping around her like a second skin. The startup sequence flowed through her hands with practiced ease: electrical systems, engine ignition, avionics, suite weapon systems. Each component responding with reassuring precision. Phantom control, you are cleared for taxi and takeoff. Mission parameters unchanged. Good hunting. Roger control, Phantom rolling. The powerful Pratt and Whitney engine roared to life as she advanced the throttle, pushing her back into her seat as the F-16 accelerated down the runway. The moment of liftoff always brought a sense of liberation, the earth falling away as the aircraft climbed into the darkening sky. Reynolds formed up on her wing as they established their course toward Helmand Province, the mountains beneath them gradually giving way to the stark, unforgiving landscape of southern Afghanistan. In the growing darkness, villages appeared as clusters of faint lights, roads as thin, pale lines cutting through the blackness, and the occasional military outpost as a geometric pattern of illumination. Phantom Striker, AWACS reports all clear along our route. ETA to station 20 minutes. Roger Striker, let's climb to Angels 25 and conserve fuel until we're called in. For the next hour, they maintained a racetrack pattern high above the target area, their presence invisible to those on the ground, but ever watchful through sophisticated sensor systems. The SEAL insertion had proceeded according to plan, with no radio chatter to indicate problems. Alex monitored her fuel state and systems while scanning the darkness below her night vision, enhanced by the aircraft's targeting pod. The compound appeared quiet, thermal signatures indicating perhaps a dozen individuals inside, nothing that suggested the high-level meeting intelligence had predicted. The first indication of trouble came at 22:37 hours. Contact Southeast Ridge, Reynolds called suddenly, multiple heat signatures moving toward the compound. Alex shifted her sensors to the indicated area. I count 15, no 20-plus individuals moving in tactical formation, not civilians. Before she could relay this information to the ground team, her radio crackled with urgent transmission. Any air asset in vicinity, this is Chaos 6. We are compromised and taking heavy fire from multiple directions. Request immediate close air support. The voice was tight with controlled stress, the unmistakable sound of gunfire providing a deadly backdrop to his words. Chaos 6, this is Phantom. Copy your request. We are on station and inbound. Mark your position. Phantom, be advised we are surrounded inside the compound. Enemy forces on all sides, distance 50 to 100 meters. IR strobe is active on our position. Alex's targeting pod quickly identified the small, pulsing infrared light that marked the SEAL team's location. The situation became immediately clear and dire. The intelligence had been wrong, or worse, the operation had been compromised. What should have been a surprise raid had turned into an ambush, with the SEAL team caught in the middle. Stryker, maintain high cover and watch for anti-aircraft fire. I'm going low for visual confirmation. Roger Phantom, watch yourself down there. Alex pushed the stick forward, sending her F-16 into a controlled dive toward the compound. At 10,000 feet, she could make out muzzle flashes surrounding the central building, the distinctive signature of AK-47s, and heavier weapons, creating a lethal perimeter around the trapped SEALs. Chaos 6 Phantom, I have visual on your situation. Be advised you are surrounded by approximately 30 to 40 hostiles, with more approaching from the southeast ridge. Copy that, Phantom. The SEAL commander's voice remained remarkably steady despite the situation. We need danger close fire mission. Our position is marked. We have wounded and cannot withdraw without support. The words danger close sent a chill through Alex. It meant the friendly forces were within 600 meters of the target, often much closer. One miscalculation, one equipment malfunction, and she could kill the very men she was trying to save. Understand danger close, she acknowledged, preparing for gun run from northeast to southwest. Keep your heads down. Alex configured her aircraft for the attack, switching to the 20mm cannon. The M61A1 Vulcan would give her the precision she needed for a danger close mission, allowing her to place fire within meters of friendly forces without risking the larger blast radius of bombs or missiles. Commencing run in 5 seconds, she announced, then pushed the aircraft into a steep dive. The ground rushed up at alarming speed, the targeting reticle in her heads-up display fixed on a cluster of enemy fighters advancing on the compound's northern wall. At 500 feet, she squeezed the trigger, sending a stream of high explosive rounds into the darkness. The effect was immediate and devastating. The cannon rounds tore into the exposed enemy fighters, their thermal signatures flaring briefly before disappearing from her display. She pulled up sharply, the G-forces pressing her into her seat as the F-16 climbed away from the ground. "Good effect, Phantom," came the call from Chaos 6. "You got at least 8 of them, but we've still got heavy pressure from the west and south sides. Copy, coming around for second run." For the next 15 minutes, Alex executed a series of precisely calculated attack runs, alternating between cannon fire and guided munitions as she systematically eliminated the enemy forces surrounding the SEAL team. Each pass brought her aircraft dangerously close to the ground, exposing her to small arms fire that occasionally streaked past her canopy in luminous arcs. "Phantom Striker, be advised I'm tracking multiple vehicles approaching from the south, likely reinforcements." "Copy, Striker. Can you engage while I continue support for the ground team?" "Affirm, moving to intercept." As Reynolds broke off to engage the approaching vehicles, Alex prepared for another gun run on enemy positions that had established a heavy machine gun whilst on a nearby rooftop. The weapon was pouring suppressive fire onto the compound, preventing any movement by the trapped SEALs. She lined up her approach, the targeting system locked on the machine gun position, when her threat warning receiver suddenly shrieked in her ear. "Missile launch! Missile launch!" The warning came too late. Even as she initiated evasive maneuvers and deployed countermeasures, Alex saw the bright flare of a shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile rising toward her aircraft. Time compressed into fractions of seconds as her training took over. "Striker Sam, launch my position." The missile, likely a Soviet-designed SA-7, tracked her aircraft despite the countermeasures. In the split-second decision that followed, Alex chose the only option that might save both her aircraft and the men on the ground. She continued her attack run while executing an aggressive defensive maneuver. The cannon roared again, eliminating the machine gun position just as the missile detonated near her right wing. The explosion sent shockwaves through the aircraft, shattering her canopy and sending fragments of metal and plastic tearing through the cockpit. Pain lanced through Alex's left temple as a shard sliced across her skin, blood immediately flowing into her eye. Warning lights flashed across her instrument panel as systems began to fail. "I'm hit," she called, fighting to maintain control of the damaged aircraft. Significant damage to right wing and control surfaces, attempting to maintain flight. Through sheer force of will and exceptional piloting skill, Alex managed to pull the wounded F-16 into a climb away from the immediate danger. Blood obscured her vision on one side, and the stick felt sluggish in her hand, but the aircraft responded enough to give her hope. "Phantom, what's your status?" Reynolds' voice came through with urgency. "Aircraft damaged but flying. Cockpit compromised. Minor injury to pilot." Alex kept her voice clinical, detached, even as she felt warm blood streaming down her face. "Still combat effective." "Negative, Phantom. Return to base immediately. I'll handle the ground support." Unable to comply, Alex responded, already turning the aircraft back toward the embattled compound. "Chaos 6 still needs support, and I'm still in the fight." Below, the situation had grown increasingly desperate for the SEAL team. Their ammunition was running low. They had 3 wounded members, and despite Alex's efforts, enemy fighters continued to press their attack from multiple directions. "Phantom, this is Chaos 6. The voice that came through her damaged radio sounded different somehow, a quality to it that cut through Alex's tactical focus. "You've done enough. Get yourself home." "Negative, Chaos 6, Alex replied, wiping blood from her eye with a gloved hand. "I'm staying until extraction arrives. Still have ordnance and fuel." Despite the pain and the warning indicators demanding her attention, Alex executed 2 more attack runs, effectively clearing a path for the SEAL team to move toward a more defensible position within the compound. Each maneuver strained both the damaged aircraft and her own injured body, but she refused to abandon the men on the ground. "QRF is inbound," Reynolds reported. "ETA 12 minutes. The Quick Reaction Force would bring helicopters and additional ground troops enough firepower to extract the embattled SEALs. But 12 minutes was an eternity in combat, especially for a team taking heavy fire. "Phantom, we've got movement on the eastern approach," Chaos 6 called. "At least 20 fighters moving into position." Alex checked her weapon status. 1 guided bomb remaining, half a belt of cannon ammunition. Enough for 1, maybe 2 more effective attacks. "Copy, Chaos 6, I see them. 1 last run coming in." Ignoring the blood that now soaked the left side of her flight suit, and the increasingly urgent warning lights, Alex lined up for what she knew would be her final attack. The guided bomb would clear the eastern approach, giving the SEALs the precious minutes they needed until reinforcements arrived. "Weapon away," she called as the bomb released from her wing pylon. "Impact in 5 seconds." The explosion blossomed in the darkness, a brief sun that illuminated the landscape in harsh relief before plunging it back into shadow. Through the smoke and debris, thermal imaging showed the enemy advance had been stopped, bodies scattered across the approach route. Direct hit Phantom. Chaos 6 reported genuine emotion breaking through his professional demeanor. "Eastern approach, clear. You just saved our asses. Glad to help." Alex managed, her voice tightening as a wave of pain washed over her. The adrenaline was beginning to ebb, making her acutely aware of her injury and the precarious state of her aircraft. "Stryker, I'm Winchester and bingo fuel. Need auto RP." "Roger that, Phantom. I've got the watch until QRF arrives. Get yourself home." Alex turned her damaged F-16 toward Bagram, each mile feeling longer than the last as she fought to keep the aircraft stable. The night sky, so vast and embracing earlier, now seemed to press down on her with oppressive weight. "Bagram Control, this is Phantom," she called when the base finally appeared on her horizon, declaring emergency, aircraft damaged by enemy fire, request priority landing, and crash crew standing by. "Copy, Phantom. You are cleared for immediate approach. Crash crew is on station." The landing that followed would later be described in official reports as an exceptional display of airmanship under extreme conditions. To Alex, it was simply survival, a test of will against pain, blood loss, and an aircraft determined to fall from the sky. The F-16's wheels touched down harder than normal, the damaged right wing creating asymmetrical lift that tried to flip the aircraft. Alex countered with instinctive precision, keeping the fighter on the runway through sheer determination until it finally rolled to a stop amidst a flurry of emergency vehicles. Hands reached for her as the canopy was forced open, voices calling her name as she was extracted from the cockpit. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was a paramedic's voice saying, "She's losing a lot of blood. Move." The military hospital at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany was a testament to American medical prowess, a state-of-the-art facility designed to care for wounded warriors from battlefields across the Middle East and Africa. For Alex, waking in its sterile confines 3 days after her emergency landing at Bagram felt like emerging from a dream into a world drained of color and urgency. Her left temple was heavily bandaged, the wound requiring 27 stitches where the shrapnel had torn through skin and muscle, missing her carotid artery by less than an inch. CT scans had revealed no permanent damage, but the doctors had been clear she had come remarkably close to death. "You have a guardian angel, Lieutenant Colonel," the neurosurgeon had told her during morning rounds. "Half an inch to the right, and we wouldn't be having this conversation." Alex had nodded, accepting the assessment with the same stoicism she applied to all aspects of her military career. Guardian angel or pure luck, the outcome was the same. She had survived when many others in similar circumstances had not. On the 4th day of her hospitalization, a visitor arrived whom Alex had not expected. Brigadier General Robert Shepard, the Air Force Chief of Special Operations, stood at the foot of her bed in immaculate service dress, his chest heavy with ribbons that chronicled decades of American military interventions. "Lieutenant Colonel Knight," he greeted her formally. "You're looking better than I expected." "Thank you, sir," Alex replied, automatically attempting to sit straighter, despite the pain that radiated from her temple. "I wasn't aware you were in theater." "I wasn't. Flew in specifically to see you." Shepard pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat, his posture remaining rigid even in this informal setting. "The SEAL team you saved has submitted a rather enthusiastic after-action report. Their commander believes your actions saved the lives of every member of his team." Alex absorbed this information with measured emotion. "I was just doing my job, sir." "No, Colonel, your job was to provide air support within mission parameters. What you did went far beyond that." Shepard reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This is being awarded with the appropriate documentation when you return stateside." He opened the box to reveal the Distinguished Flying Cross, its bronze cross and laurel wreath glinting under the hospital lights. The medal was awarded for heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, a recognition of valor that few aviators ever received. "The mission details will remain classified." Shepard continued closing the box and placing it on her bedside table. The official citation will reference extraordinary heroism in support of coalition forces, but will not specify the location or nature of the operation. Alex felt a familiar hollowness expanding within her chest. Another classified mission. Another story that would never be told. Another echo of her father's hidden sacrifice. I understand, sir. Shepard studied her for a moment, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Your father would be proud, Knight. He understood better than most the cost of secrecy in our line of work. The mention of her father sent a jolt through Alex that had nothing to do with her physical wound. Sir, did you know my father? Colonel William Knight, only by reputation. Shepard stood straightening his uniform jacket. But in our community, that reputation was legendary. After Shepard departed, Alex was left alone with the metal box and the growing sense that there were connections between her father's final mission and her own experience in Helmand that remained obscured by layers of military classification and necessity. The weeks that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of medical evaluations, psychological assessments, and debriefings. By the time she was cleared to return to limited duty, Alex had made a decision that surprised even herself. After 15 years of service, she would not seek another combat deployment. The final straw came during a mandatory session with a military psychologist, a standard procedure for pilots involved in combat incidents. Do you ever think about the men you saved? The doctor had asked, his pen poised above his notepad. Every day, Alex had admitted. And does it bring you satisfaction knowing your actions preserved their lives? Alex had considered the question carefully. It should. But mostly I think about the fact that I'll never know who they were, and they'll never know who I was. It was a classified mission. My name won't appear in their reports just as their names don't appear in mine. We're ghosts to each other. The psychologist had noted something in his pad. And that bothers you. Wouldn't it bother you to risk everything for someone and then have that connection erased from official record? The doctor had not had an answer for that, but the question had crystallized something in Alex's mind. She had joined the Air Force partly to follow her father's path, partly to seek answers about his death. 15 years later, she had instead replicated his experience, performing classified missions that would never be acknowledged, saving lives that would never know her name. The symmetry felt both profound and profoundly unsatisfying. 6 months after Helmand, Alex stood in the locker room at Miramar, packing away the last remnants of her military career. The scar at her temple had faded to a thin white line barely visible unless you knew to look for it. The psychological scars were less obvious, but no less real. Occasional nightmares, a heightened startle response, moments of dissociation when aircraft passed overhead. The diagnosis was clear: post-traumatic stress disorder, mild to moderate, and not uncommon among combat veterans, certainly not disqualifying for continued service. But for Alex, it represented something more fundamental, a sign that perhaps it was time to find a different path. Her squadron mates had been surprised by her decision to separate from service. With her record and experience, promotion to full colonel had seemed assured. Several had tried to change her mind, arguing that the Air Force needed officers with her combat experience and leadership qualities. The military will survive without me, she had told her squadron commander when he made a final attempt to persuade her to stay. There are other pilots, other leaders. Not like you, Knight, he had responded, genuine regret in his voice. Your kind doesn't come along often. The distinguished Flying Cross remained in its always tucked into her duffel bag alongside the folded American flag from her father's funeral and the faded photograph of him standing beside his F-4 Phantom. 3 generations of night service to country connected by duty, sacrifice, and secrets. As Alex closed her locker for the final time, her phone vibrated with an incoming text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the name at the end brought an unexpected smile to her face. Heard you're going civilian. Can't blame you after what happened. But before you disappear, there are things you should know about your father. Things that have been classified too long. The symposium next week in San Diego. I'll be there, trying to. So will people who know the truth. Come find me. McAllister. Alex stared at the message, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. James McAllister had been her father's wingman during the Gulf War, one of the last people to see him alive. If anyone knew what had really happened on that classified mission in '91, it would be him. For 15 years, she had sought answers while following in her father's footsteps. Now perhaps those answers were finally within reach. But they would come as she was hanging up her wings, transitioning to civilian life. The timing seemed both ironic and somehow appropriate. Alex slipped the phone back into her pocket and shouldered her duffel bag. Whatever truths awaited her at the symposium, she would face them not as Lieutenant Colonel Knight, but simply as Alexis Knight, daughter of William, seeking closure for a chapter that had defined both their lives. As she walked through the corridors of the base that had been her home, memories surfaced and receded like tides. Her first solo flight, the camaraderie of the ready room, the adrenaline rush of combat, the quiet satisfaction of missions, completed lives, saved duties, fulfilled. She had given 15 years of her life to the Air Force, had flown 89 combat missions, had pushed herself and her aircraft to limits few would ever experience. She had earned her call sign, her medals, her place in the brotherhood of combat aviators. But as she stepped into the California sunshine, Alex realized she had never found what she had initially sought, the truth about her father's last mission. Now, with McAllister's message, that possibility had suddenly, unexpectedly emerged. The symposium would bring together special operations veterans, active duty personnel, and defense industry representatives. Among them, apparently, would be people who knew what had really happened to Colonel William Knight in the skies over Iraq in 1991. Among them, perhaps, would be the answers Alex had been seeking since she was 18 years old. She climbed into her Jeep and started the engine, her decision made. One last mission, not in the cockpit of an F-16, but in a convention center filled with the men and women who shared the burden of classified operations and unacknowledged sacrifices. One last chance to understand the legacy she had inherited and unknowingly continued. One last opportunity to bring a ghost home from the shadows. The San Diego Convention Center rose like a gleaming white sail against the harbor skyline, its curved architecture reminiscent of the naval vessels that had made this city their home for generations. Inside, the annual Special Operations Symposium had transformed the cavernous exhibition hall into a gathering of America's warrior elite, men and women who operated in the shadows of global conflicts, whose stories were often classified and whose sacrifices frequently went unacknowledged by the country they served. Alexis Knight paused at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the scene before her. Hundreds of men in tactical pants and polo shirts moved through the space with the unmistakable bearing of special operators, that peculiar combination of relaxed alertness that came from years of living on the razor's edge between life and death. Vendor booths showcased the latest in military technology, advanced optics systems, tactical gear, specialized firearms and communications equipment designed to give American forces the edge in combat zones around the world. In her faded jeans, Stanford University sweatshirt, and worn sneakers, Alex felt like a civilian intruder in this bastion of martial expertise. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 15 years of fighting to be taken seriously in the male-dominated world of fighter aviation, she had deliberately chosen to blend into the background today, to observe rather than be observed. "You came." Alex turned to find her brother Derek approaching, his face breaking into a genuine smile. In his tactical pants and navy blue polo shirt, emblazoned with a subtle SEAL Team 5 logo, he looked every inch the special operator, moving with the contained power of a predator, even in this civilian setting. "I said I would," Alex replied, accepting his brief but fierce hug. "McAllister convinced me." Derek raised an eyebrow. "The general found you, I should have known. Those old cold warriors have networks that make our intelligence agencies look amateur." "He said there would be people here who know about Dad," Alex said quietly, scanning the crowd. "About what really happened." Derek nodded, his expression growing serious. "Sullivan knows. He mentioned something to me last year during a training exercise, but when I pressed for details, he clammed up. Said it wasn't his story to tell." He gestured toward the main stage at the far end of the hall. "He's speaking in 30 minutes. I saved us seats near the front." As they made their way through the crowded exhibition floor, Alex felt the weight of anonymous gazes following them. Not because anyone recognized her, her time as Phantom remained classified, but because the attendees noticed Derek's SEAL insignia and the easy confidence with which he navigated the space. Several times they were stopped by other operators who clasped Derek's hand and exchanged the abbreviated greetings of men who shared bonds forged in combat. "Knight didn't expect to see you here, brother." A burly man with a salt and pepper beard intercepted them near the stage area, clapping Derek on the shoulder with enough force to stagger a lesser man. "Jackson," Derek grinned, "thought you were still playing in the sandbox." "Rotated back last month," Jackson replied before turning curious eyes toward Alex. "And who's this, my sister Alex?" Derek said with unmistakable pride. "Former Air Force, F-16 driver." Jackson's eyebrows rose as he extended a hand to Alex. "No kidding, much respect, ma'am. You folks upstairs saved our asses more times than I can count." Alex shook his hand, noting the calloused palm and missing portion of his little finger. Combat injuries told their own stories. "Just doing our job," she replied with the standard aviator's response. "Your sister's being modest," Derek added. "She flew 89 combat missions, has a distinguished flying cross." Jackson whistled low. "That's serious hardware. You must have some stories." Alex acknowledged discomfort rising as the conversation veered toward her service record. "Most of them I can't tell." Understanding flashed across Jackson's weathered face. "Say no more, we all got those kinds of stories." He checked his watch. "Better find my seat. Sullivan's about to start, and that man never runs late." "Good seeing you, Knight, ma'am." With a respectful nod to Alex, he moved toward the seating area. Derek led Alex to two reserved seats in the third row, close enough to see the speaker's expressions, but not so close as to draw attention. "You didn't mention you'd be bringing a guest," a familiar voice said from behind them. Alex turned to find James McAllister standing in the aisle, his tall frame still commanding despite civilian clothes. The retired general's eyes crinkled with approval as he took her in. "Figured it was time for a family reunion," Derek replied, standing to shake McAllister's hand. "You're looking well, Alex," McAllister said, taking the seat next to her. "Civilian life agrees with you." "Still adjusting," she admitted. "Turns out 15 years of military routine is hard to shake." McAllister nodded understanding. "Takes time. Took me nearly 2 years before I stopped waking up at 0500 every morning." "General," Alex began, lowering her voice, "you said there would be people here who know about my father. About what really happened." McAllister's gaze shifted to the stage where preparations were being made for the keynote address. "Sullivan knows. He was there that night. Just a junior officer, but he was there. His father commanded the SEAL team your dad saved. And he's going to talk about it." Alex asked, hope and apprehension mingling in her chest. "Not officially," McAllister replied. "That mission is still technically classified. But," he paused as the lights dimmed, signaling the start of the program, "just listen carefully and be ready." Before Alex could ask what he meant, a distinguished-looking general took the stage to introduce the keynote speaker. The standard biographical details washed over her. Captain Jack Sullivan's decorated career, spanning 2 decades, his leadership of multiple classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, his reputation as one of the SEAL community's most respected tactical innovators. And then Sullivan himself appeared, moving across the stage with the fluid confidence of a man entirely comfortable in his own skin. Average height but powerfully built, with graying temples that spoke of years of stress and sun exposure, he carried himself with the quiet authority that came from having made life-and-death decisions under the most extreme conditions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sullivan began, his voice resonant through the sound system, "it's customary at these events to begin with some lighthearted remarks, maybe a joke about inter-service rivalry, or a comment about how Marines can find trouble in an empty room." Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. "But I'm going to skip the pleasantries today." Sullivan continued, his expression growing serious. "Because I want to talk about something more important. I want to talk about the bonds that connect those of us who've served in the world's dangerous places. Bonds that transcend branch of service, rank, or background." For the next 20 minutes, Sullivan held the audience spellbound as he recounted experiences from Operation Red Wings, the ill-fated 2005 mission immortalized in the book and film Lone Survivor. His voice painted vivid pictures of combat's chaos, the brotherhood that sustained warriors through unimaginable challenges, and the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Alex found herself leaning forward despite her intention to remain detached. Sullivan was a natural storyteller, weaving technical details with human emotion in a way that made even her, someone who had lived through her own share of combat, feel the weight of those moments in the Hindu Kush Mountains. "The thing about combat," Sullivan was saying, his hands gesturing to emphasize his point, is that it strips away everything that doesn't matter. Your college degree doesn't mean shit when bullets are flying. Your bank account can't stop an RP. All that matters is the person next to you and whether you can count on them when everything goes sideways. The audience was hanging on every word, and Alex could see why her brother idolized this man. Then, without warning, Sullivan stopped mid-sentence. The transition was so abrupt that Alex looked up from her hands, wondering if there was a technical problem. But the captain was simply standing there, his steel gray eyes sweeping the crowd with the methodical precision of a sniper acquiring targets. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable, then electric with anticipation. "I'm going to ask something," Sullivan finally said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "And I need complete honesty." He paused again, letting the weight of his words settle over the crowd. Alex felt a prickle of unease, though she couldn't say why. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't part of his prepared remarks. "Any combat pilots in here tonight?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. And I mean real combat, not training exercises or ferry flights or showing the flag in some peaceful corner of the world. Sullivan continued, his gaze still scanning the audience. "I'm talking about people who've had bullets flying into them while they're flying. People who've dropped ordnance in anger. People who know what it's like to have someone on the ground screaming for help over the radio while you're trying to thread the needle between saving lives and avoiding a blue-on-blue incident." Alex's stomach clenched, as if she'd just pulled 6 Gs in a tight turn. She could feel the crowd's energy shift, people sitting up straighter, looking around with curiosity and anticipation. This wasn't just a rhetorical question. Sullivan was building to something. Around her, perhaps a dozen hands went up, all belonging to men with the unmistakable bearing of military aviators. She recognized the type immediately. The slightly cocky posture that came from mastering one of the world's most demanding professions, is the way they held their shoulders, the unconscious habit of scanning the room even in a safe environment. These were her people, her tribe, the brotherhood of warriors who'd learned to dance with death at 500 knots. Sullivan was nodding approvingly at the raised hands, clearly building to some point about air-ground coordination. Alex's hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as she considered raising it. She'd spent 15 years proving herself in a male-dominated field, fighting for every opportunity, every mission, every chance to show that she belonged in the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. Even now, sitting in civilian clothes at a public event, the old instinct to avoid drawing attention warred with something deeper. The pride of a warrior who'd earned her place in the sky through skill, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. "Come on, don't be shy," Captain Sullivan pressed, his eyes still scanning the crowd. "I know there are more of you out there." His voice carried a note of gentle challenge, the kind of tone that suggested he understood the reluctance some might feel about identifying themselves in such a public forum. "This isn't about ego or war stories. What I'm building to here is important, and I need you to trust me on this." Alex felt her brother's elbow nudge her ribs, a gentle but insistent pressure that made her acutely aware of his presence beside her. He knew exactly what she'd done in the Air Force, even if she never talked about it at family dinners or holiday gatherings. Derek had been the one to frame her distinguished flying cross citation and hang it in his apartment, despite her protests that it was too much attention. The silence in the convention center stretched like a taut wire, becoming almost physical in its intensity. Alex could hear the subtle sounds that emerged when 800 people tried to remain perfectly still. The whisper of fabric against fabric, the soft creak of chairs, someone's stomach growling 3 rows ahead. The air conditioning system hummed overhead, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the muffled sounds of San Diego traffic through the building's walls. The internal debate raging in Alex's mind was fierce and immediate. Part of her, the part that had learned to survive and thrive in a profession where being different could be dangerous, screamed at her to remain seated. She'd spent years perfecting the art of being exceptional without being exceptional, of proving her worth, without drawing the kind of attention that invited scrutiny, criticism, or worse. But another part of her, the part that had strapped into an F-16 cockpit 89 times knowing she might not come home, was tired of hiding. Tired of letting other people tell her story, or more often of having no story told at all. She thought about the young women she'd mentored over the years, the ones who'd sought her out after hearing whispered rumors about a female fighter pilot who'd actually seen combat. She remembered their faces hungry for proof that it was possible that the barriers weren't insurmountable, that someone like them could make it to the sharp end of the spear. Alex's mind flashed to a conversation she'd had with her squadron commander just before her retirement ceremony. Colonel Catherine Valkyrie Williams had been one of the first women to fly combat missions during Desert Storm, and she'd pulled Alex aside for what she'd called the talk, the one that every successful female military officer eventually had to have with herself. "You know what the hardest part of this job is?" Valkyrie had asked, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. "It's not the flying, it's not the combat. It's deciding when to be visible and when to be invisible. When to stand up and be counted, and when to keep your head down and just do the work." Alex had nodded, understanding exactly what her mentor meant. Every woman in a male-dominated field faced the same impossible calculus. Be too quiet and your achievements went unnoticed. Be too loud and you were labeled as attention-seeking or difficult. The sweet spot was narrow and constantly shifting, and the consequences of miscalculating could be career-ending. But here's the thing. Valkyrie had continued, her eyes boring into Alex's with an intensity that made her sit up straighter. "Sometimes you have to choose to be visible, not for yourself, but for the ones coming behind you. Sometimes you have to stand up and be counted, because if you don't, who will?" Now sitting in the convention center, with Captain Sullivan's challenge hanging in the air, Alex felt the weight of that conversation pressing down on her. She thought about the statistics she knew by heart. How few women had flown combat missions, how many barriers still existed, how many young girls grew up never knowing that someone like them had ever strapped on a fighter aircraft and gone to war. Then, as if controlled by someone else, Alex felt herself rising. The movement was fluid and confident, the same way she'd stood in countless briefing rooms before dangerous missions, the same posture she'd adopted when accepting her commission as a second lieutenant fresh out of the Air Force Academy. There was no hesitation in the motion, no uncertainty. It was the movement of someone who'd made a decision and was prepared to live with the consequences. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations died mid-sentence, as if someone had thrown a switch. Heads swiveled toward her with the synchronized precision of a drill team, and Alex could feel the weight of 800 pairs of eyes settling on her like a physical force. A woman near the front actually gasped audibly, the sound cutting through the silence like a blade. Alex stood perfectly still, her chin raised slightly in a gesture that was part defiance, part pride, and entirely authentic. She met Captain Sullivan's surprised gaze across the sea of staring faces, her posture radiating the quiet confidence that came from years of proving herself in situations where failure meant death. The silence was so complete she could hear the air conditioning humming overhead, the distant rumble of traffic outside, and what sounded like someone's sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind her. Captain Sullivan's expression shifted from surprise to intense curiosity, his eyebrows raising slightly as he processed what he was seeing. Alex could practically see the gears turning in his head, the mental recalibration that happened when expectations collided with reality. She'd seen that look before countless times in briefing rooms and ready rooms and operations centers around the world. It was the moment when someone realized their assumptions had been wrong. "Ma'am," Sullivan said, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system, each word measured and respectful. The formal address was deliberate, Alex realized, a signal to the crowd that this wasn't a moment for casual interaction or surprise commentary. "What did you fly?" The question hung in the air like ordnance waiting to detonate. Alex felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had once preceded every combat mission, the heightened awareness that came when everything was on the line. She could feel Derek's presence beside her, could sense his mixture of pride and anxiety as he waited for her response. Around the auditorium, she was aware of people leaning forward in their seats, cell phones being discreetly raised to capture the moment, whispered conversations starting and stopping as people tried to process what they were witnessing. "F-16 Fighting Falcon." Alex replied, her voice steady and clear, carrying the authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak those words. "Call sign Viper 99. 89 combat sorties, Afghanistan 2018 to 220. The auditorium exploded, not with polite applause or respectful acknowledgement, but with genuine shock and excitement that rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Someone in the back shouted, "Holy shit!" before catching himself, his voice carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect space. Another voice called out, No way! From somewhere to Alex's left, followed immediately by a sharp language, from what sounded like a senior NCO. Alex watched the wave of reactions spread through the crowd, faces turning toward neighbors with expressions of amazement, hands gesturing animatedly as people tried to process what they'd just heard. She could see veterans pulling out phones to Google her call sign, others turning to companions with looks that clearly said, "Did you know about this?" The energy in the room had shifted completely, transforming from polite attention to electric excitement. Captain Sullivan's face broke into a wide grin that transformed his entire appearance, erasing years of hard living and replacing them with something approaching boyish enthusiasm. "Viper," he repeated, and Alex saw recognition begin to dawn in his eyes like sunrise breaking over a mountain range. His expression shifted again, this time to something deeper, a look of concentration as he accessed memories that had been filed away but never forgotten. "Wait a minute," Sullivan said slowly, his voice trailing off as he worked through whatever mental database he was accessing. "Viper, September 15th, 2019, Helmand Province." The words came out with increasing certainty, each one building on the last. "You're the pilot who saved Bravo Team when we were pinned down in that compound." Alex's heart stopped. The convention center, the crowd, the noise. Everything faded away. She found herself transported back to that night over Afghanistan. She remembered the mission with crystalline clarity. The desperate radio calls, the danger-close gun runs, the gratitude in the ground controller's voice when the enemy fire finally slackened. But she'd never known the names of the men she'd helped save, never seen their faces or learned their stories. They'd been voices on the radio, thermal signatures on her targeting pod coordinates on a map. "That was your team?" she asked, her professional composure cracking slightly for the first time since she'd stood up. The question came out softer than she'd intended, carrying a note of wonder that she couldn't quite suppress. Around them, the crowd had gone silent again, sensing that something significant was happening, that they were witnessing a moment that transcended the usual boundaries of a military symposium. Sullivan nodded slowly, his grin fading into something more serious, more profound. "Bravo Team 3rd Platoon SEAL Team 5, he confirmed. "We were supposed to be in and out in 20 minutes. Quick hit on a high-value target, grab some intel, and disappear before anyone knew we were there." His voice carried the weight of memory, the particular tone that veterans used when recounting missions that had gone sideways. "Instead, we walked into a hornet's nest," Sullivan continued, his eyes never leaving Alex's face. "Someone had tipped them off, and they were waiting for us. We had maybe 30 seconds of surprise before the whole neighborhood lit up like the 4th of July. By the time we realized what was happening, we were surrounded and taking fire from 3 directions." Alex felt a chill run down her spine as she remembered monitoring the radio traffic that night, the way the routine mission chatter had suddenly exploded into chaos. She could still hear the forward air controller's voice, "Call sign Chaos 6, as he tried to coordinate the extraction while bullets snapped overhead. "You came in so low I could see your face through the canopy," Sullivan said, his voice thick with emotion that he wasn't trying to hide. "Get up here," Captain Sullivan commanded, but his tone was warm with respect and something deeper, the kind of recognition that passed between warriors who'd shared the crucible of combat. "Right now, I mean it." His voice carried the authority of command, but Alex could hear the emotion underneath the weight of gratitude that had been carried for years without an outlet. As Alex began walking down the aisle, the applause started slowly, then built like an avalanche, gaining momentum with each step she took. It wasn't the polite, measured clapping of a formal military ceremony, but something raw and genuine that seemed to come from the gut rather than social obligation. People were rising to their feet as she passed, some wiping their eyes, others shaking their heads in amazement. A grizzled master sergeant near the middle aisle reached out to briefly touch her shoulder as she walked by, his weathered face split by a grin that spoke of shared understanding. "That's what a hero looks like," someone called out from the crowd, and Alex felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She'd never been comfortable with that word, hero. To her, she'd simply been doing her job, executing the mission she'd trained for, living up to the oath she'd taken. But looking at the faces around her, seeing the genuine emotion and respect, she began to understand that sometimes the impact of your actions extended far beyond your own understanding of them. The walk to the stage felt both eternal and instantaneous. Alex was acutely aware of every step, every face in the crowd, every camera phone recording the moment. But she was also transported back to that night over Afghanistan, remembering the weight of responsibility she'd felt as she'd lined up for her first gun run, knowing that men's lives hung in the balance of her accuracy and courage. When she reached the stage, Captain Sullivan extended his hand in what started as a formal handshake, but quickly transformed into something more personal. He pulled her into a brief, fierce hug that spoke of brotherhood, forged in fire, the kind of bond that existed between people who'd faced death together and emerged on the other side. Alex could feel a strength in his embrace, but also a tremor that suggested this moment was affecting him as deeply as it was affecting her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sullivan announced, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system as he turned to address the crowd while keeping one hand on Alex's shoulder. "This woman saved my life and the lives of 7 of my teammates. She put her aircraft between us and a company of Taliban fighters, made gun runs so low I could see the determination in her eyes through her helmet visor." The applause thundered through the convention center, but Sullivan raised his hand for silence. He wasn't finished, and Alex could see that he had more to say, something that went beyond the simple recounting of a successful mission. "Let me tell you what really happened that night." Sullivan continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a man who had told this story before, but never with the protagonist standing beside him. "We were pinned down in a compound that was supposed to be lightly defended. Instead, we found ourselves facing what felt like half the Taliban army. They had us surrounded, and they were closing in." Alex remembered the thermal imagery from her targeting pod, the way the enemy fighters had moved with tactical precision, using cover and concealment as they'd attempted to overrun the SEAL position. It had been clear, even from 15,000 feet, that the situation was desperate. The rules of engagement were clear. Sullivan said, his eyes scanning the crowd. Danger close meant she had every right to refuse the mission. The risk of friendly fire was enormous. One miscalculation, one slight error in targeting, and she could have killed the very people she was trying to save. He paused, letting the weight of that statement settle over the audience. But Viper didn't hesitate. She came in low and fast, putting 20mm cannon rounds exactly where they needed to go. And when that wasn't enough, when the enemy kept pressing their attack, she came back again and again. For 45 minutes, she was our guardian angel, keeping the wolves at bay until the quick reaction force could reach us. Alex felt tears threatening something that hadn't happened in years. The clinical after-action reports had never captured the human element of that night. The voices on the radio, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that real people with families and futures were depending on her skill and courage. "Just doing my job, Captain." Alex managed her voice steady despite the emotion she was feeling. It was the standard response, the one that every military professional gave when praised for exceptional performance. But even as she said it, she knew it was both true and inadequate. "No," Sullivan said firmly, addressing both her and the crowd. "You went above and beyond. You took risks that weren't required, made decisions that saved lives, and showed the kind of courage that defines the very best of our military." He turned to face the audience fully. "And everyone in this room needs to understand, heroism doesn't have a gender. Courage doesn't have a gender. Excellence doesn't have a gender." The standing ovation that followed lasted 5 full minutes. But what Alex remembered most was the young girl in the front row, maybe 12 years old, staring at her with wide, wondering eyes. The girl was sitting next to what was obviously her father, a man in navy dress blues whose chest displayed the ribbons of multiple deployments. But it was the daughter's expression that captured Alex's attention, a look of amazement and possibility, as if she was seeing her own future take flight. As the applause finally began to die down, Alex caught the girl's eye and smiled, offering a small wave that was returned with enthusiasm that bordered on hero worship. The remainder of the symposium passed in a blur of handshakes, introductions, and impromptu reunions. Veterans who had served with Alex's father approached to share stories of his courage and leadership. Young female officers sought her out for advice and mentorship. And throughout it all, Derek remained at her side, his presence a steady anchor in the swirling current of attention. As the evening reception wound down, Sullivan approached Alex, where she stood by a window overlooking San Diego Bay, the city lights reflecting in the dark water. "Got a minute?" he asked, gesturing toward a quieter corner of the hall. Alex nodded, following him to a small seating area away from the main crowd. Sullivan's expression had grown serious again, the animated storyteller of the podium replaced by a man with something important to share. There's something else I wanted to tell you, he began, his voice low enough that only Alex could hear. Something about your father. Alex felt her pulse quicken. You knew him? Not directly, Sullivan replied, but my father did. Commander William Sullivan was the SEAL team leader your dad saved in Iraq in 1991. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Alex had suspected a connection, but hearing it confirmed with such specificity made her dizzy with its implications. My father told me the story before he died, Sullivan continued. How your dad flew repeated danger close passes to keep the enemy at bay while their extraction helicopter was inbound. How on the final pass he took a hit, but stayed with his aircraft long enough to complete one more strafing run. That decision saved the entire team, including my father. Alex struggled to process what she was hearing. The parallels between her father's final mission and her own experience in Helmand were too precise to be coincidence. Why wasn't this made public? She asked, the old anger resurfacing. Why cover it up? Politics, Sullivan said, echoing McAllister's explanation. The mission wasn't authorized. We weren't supposed to have operations in that sector after the ceasefire. Acknowledging what happened would have created diplomatic problems. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn leather case. My father kept this. He wanted it returned to your family, but the classification made that impossible while he was alive. When he passed, he made me promise to find a way. With careful reverence, Sullivan opened the case to reveal a tarnished set of pilot's wings. Not the standard Air Force issue, but a special variant given to pilots who had provided exceptional support to Special Operations Forces. Beneath the wings lay a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. This is a letter my father wrote to yours thanking him for his sacrifice. He never got to send it. Alex took the case with trembling hands, the weight of it representing far more than the metal and paper it contained. It was a tangible connection to her father, a piece of the puzzle that had eluded her for so long. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sullivan nodded, understanding in his eyes. There's one more thing. That mission you flew in Helmand, it wasn't a coincidence that you were there when we needed you. McAllister made sure you were assigned to that sector that night. Alex looked up sharply. What? He knew your call sign, knew your reputation. He made sure you were the one on station when we went in. Sullivan's expression was solemn. I think he wanted to give you the chance your father never had, to complete the mission and come home. The implications of this revelation expanded through Alex's consciousness like ripples in still water. McAllister had orchestrated a moment of historical symmetry, allowing her to replicate and survive the mission that had taken her father's life. Does Derek know any of this? She asked. Sullivan shook his head. Not all of it. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell him about the connection between our fathers. He smiled slightly. Seems like that moment is now. As they rejoined the reception, Alex spotted her brother deep in conversation with McAllister and several other veterans. The retired general caught her eye across the room and offered a small, knowing nod. In that gesture, Alex read both acknowledgement and apology, for the secrets kept, for the truths withheld, for the carefully managed revelation that had finally brought her full circle. 1 month after the symposium, Alex found herself sitting in an office at the Pentagon facing the Chief of Staff of the Air Force across a polished mahogany desk. We'd like you to consider a new role, Ms. Knight, the 4-star general said, sliding a folder across to her. Special advisor to our female combat aviator program. There's a growing cohort of young women entering flight training who could benefit from your experience. Alex opened the folder to find a detailed proposal, a position that would allow her to mentor female pilots while maintaining her civilian status, a bridge between her military past and her uncertain future. Why me? She asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The general smiled. Because since that symposium in San Diego, applications from young women to our combat aviation programs have increased by 30%. Your story is having an impact whether you intended it to or not. In the weeks following the symposium, Alex had found herself at the center of a quiet revolution. The video of her standing to identify herself of Sullivan's recognition and emotional tribute had gone viral within military circles. News outlets had picked up the story, running features on the forgotten female combat pilots who had served with distinction in America's recent wars. Derek had embraced his role as her proudest supporter, framing newspaper articles alongside her distinguished flying cross in his apartment. McAllister had introduced her to a network of retired generals and admirals who were working to declassify more stories of exceptional service by military women. And Sullivan had become both friend and collaborator, their shared experiences forming the foundation of an unlikely partnership. "I'll consider it," Alex told the general, closing the folder. "But I have a condition." "Name it." "I want the full story of my father's final mission declassified and his service properly recognized. No more secrets, no more convenient narratives." The general's expression turned thoughtful. "That would require approvals at the highest levels. There are diplomatic considerations." "It's been over 30 years, Alex countered. "The world has changed. The truth won't start a war now." After a long moment, the general nodded. "I'll take it to the secretary personally. No promises, but I think it's time." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning at Arlington National Cemetery, a small ceremony took place beside the grave of Colonel William Knight. Present were his children Alexis and Derek, his former wingman James McAllister, Jack Sullivan and several members of the SEAL team his father had once led, and a dozen active-duty female fighter pilots in dress uniform. The Secretary of the Air Force himself unveiled a new headstone, one that finally acknowledged the true circumstances of William Knight's death. Killed in action while saving American lives, his courage above Iraq lives on in the skies and in the hearts of those who serve. As the ceremony concluded, a young girl approached Alex, her eyes shining with a barely contained excitement. It was Emma, the 12-year-old from the symposium, accompanied by her father in his Navy uniform. "Ms. Knight," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I wanted to tell you, I'm applying for the Air Force Academy when I turn 17. I want to be a fighter pilot like you." Alex knelt to meet the girl's eyes, seeing in them the same determination she had once felt, the same hunger for purpose and meaning. "It won't be easy," she said honestly. Emma nodded solemnly. "The best things never are." "Tell you what," Alex replied, a smile spreading across her face. "How about we start with a flight lesson? I have access to a training aircraft at Andrews." The girl's eyes widened with disbelief and joy. "Really, when? How about next Saturday?" Alex glanced up at Emma's father, who nodded his permission with unmistakable pride. As the cemetery emptied, Alex remained alone at her father's grave, the autumn leaves swirling around her in a gentle dance. She traced her fingers over the new inscription, feeling a sense of completion that had eluded her for decades. "We got there, Dad," she whispered. "It took some time, but we got there." Above the contrails of a military transport crossed the blue October sky, a reminder of the countless missions flown by men and women who had taken the same oath, faced the same dangers, and served with the same dedication as William Knight and his daughter after him. Some stories remain classified, locked away in secure files, in the memories of those who had lived them. But increasingly, the full tapestry of American military service, including the contributions of women like Alex, was being revealed, acknowledged, and celebrated. For Lieutenant Colonel Alexis Phantom, Knight retired, that recognition wasn't about personal glory or public accolades. It was about truth, about legacy, and about ensuring that the young Emmas of the world would never have to wonder if someone like them had ever strapped into a fighter aircraft and gone to war. It was about breaking the silence not just for herself or her father, but for all those whose service had been hidden in the shadows of classification and convenience. As Alex turned to leave, the setting sun caught the silver wings pinned to her lapel. Her father's wings returned after 30 years. They glinted in the fading light, a beacon of all that had been and all that was yet to come.